Hi everyone, it's Leanne and Merrick, and this is episode 3 of the Modern Girl's Guide to Sewing. Obviously, before you start sewing, you need to know about your sewing machine, because learning its parts and how they work is the first step in learning how to sew.
Machines are all slightly different from each other, but they all have the same basic capabilities. So we'll show you on both of these machines, this old mechanical Kenmore and this new computerized Janome, so you can see the differences and similarities, and then you can figure out your sewing machine from there. It will hopefully be similar to one of them. Use your user's manual to help if needed.
First, plug it in. Some machines come with 2 separate plugs, one for the pedal and one for the wall plug, and others come with them connected to each other. The mechanical machine has them connected,
and the computerized machine has 2 separate plugs that you can see here.
Plug them in like this, and turn your machine on with the power button.
Next, let's go over all the parts of your machine. Grab a snack, lock your kids in their room, and get ready to listen really well, because this is a lot of information at once, but it is super important.
Spool pin. This is where you'll put your spool of thread. Some machines have them up top, some in back. Here's the bobbin winder. This is where you'll thread your bobbin, and we'll get to that a little later. This is the balance wheel. It's a hand crank that makes your sewing machine advance manually. It's usually used to sink your needle down into the fabric before starting a seam and to lift the needle out of the fabric when finishing a seam. Always turn the wheel toward your body, never turn it in the opposite direction. This is the takedown lever. It's used to thread the sewing machine, and we'll get to that in a little bit.
Now let's move down to this section of the machine. This is the needle. Here's the presser foot, which is a metal or plastic plate that applies pressure to your fabric and stabilizes the fabric as you sew. There are tons of different presser feet, and we'll show you how to use the most common ones in the next video. But for now, this is what it looks like. And back here is the lever we'll use to pull it up and push it down. It always needs to be down when you sew. In fact, some machines won't even let you sew without it being down. Here's the needle plate, a metal plate below your needle. You'll see it has lines and measurements on here that you'll use as a guide when sewing. We'll cover more of that in the next video as well. These are the feed dogs, little teeth that move back and forth to pull your fabric through as you sew.
This is the bobbin system. Your bobbin system will either be front loading here, like this machine, or top loading here, like this machine. When your machine makes a stitch, it takes thread from the top of the machine and the bottom of the machine and locks them together to create a stitch. This is where the bottom thread is supplied. Here's a bobbin, and yours will be either metal or plastic. Front-loading machines will have a bobbin case. Pull the tab on the front of the bobbin case and then pull it out of the bobbin chamber. We'll show you how to fill the bobbin and thread in just a minute. This is the reverse lever or reverse button. When you begin and end a seam, you'll want to back stitch or back tack to lock your stitching in place so it doesn't come unraveled. Press and hold this button or lever while pushing on your pedal, and your stitching will go in reverse. Let go of the button and your stitching will return to a forward stitch.
Here's your tension dial. This is the dial that controls the tension of your top and bottom threads to make sure they are balanced and that your stitches are nice and strong. We'll talk more about this later, but this is where you control it. Here's your stitch selector. We'll talk more about the different kinds of stitches in a few videos, but here is where you change from a straight stitch to a zigzag stitch to a buttonhole stitch, etc. On the computerized machines, you'll type in a number, and on the mechanical machines, you'll probably turn a dial. Here is your stitch width and length selector. You'll need different lengths and widths of stitches depending on your project or the kind of fabric you're working with. So here is where you'll select and change your stitch width and length. Again, on the mechanical machines, it will probably be a dial, and on the computerized machines, you'll push the arrow buttons right or left to increase or to decrease the length and width of your stitch.
Now that we know all the parts of the machine, let's thread it so we can start sewing. First, let's wind the bobbin. Remember, the bobbin is a spool of thread that is located under the needle on your machine and supplies the underside portion of a stitch. Open the covering that stores the bobbin and take it out. If yours is front loading, the bobbin will be inside a metal bobbin case, so pull the tab to get the bobbin case out and then drop the bobbin out of the case. every time you refill the bobbin, you should remove any previous thread. It's always a good idea to have a lot of extra bobbins so you don't have to remove a full spool every time you need to change thread colors. You'll need to disengage your needle so your machine knows you're winding your bobbin. When you slide the bobbin winding pin over on the computerized machine, it automatically disengages your needle. And on the mechanical machine, you pop the hand crank out like this to disengage your needle. Check your user manual and determine which method your machine uses. Choose your thread color and place your spool on the spool pin on top of your sewing machine. The thread should release counterclockwise. Pull the thread out and loop it around the bobbin winding tension disc on the top of your machine and over toward the bobbin pin. Thread the end of the thread through the tiny hole in the top of your bobbin spool like this, with several inches hanging out. Hold on to this thread with one hand and then place your bobbin on the bobbin pin. Slide the bobbin pin over to the right to lock it in place. While still holding onto the thread, softly push on your foot pedal and continue pushing until the bobbin spool is filled with thread. Your machine should stop winding when the bobbin is filled. Once it's filled, slide the bobbin pin over to unlock it and trim the long thread sticking out the top. If you have a computerized machine, your needle will now be re-engaged since you just slid the bobbin pin over. If you have a mechanical machine, re-engage it manually now. Pull the bobbin off the pin, clip your thread to separate it from the spool, leaving a 3 to 4 inch tail of thread.
Sorry, guys. That was a lot of information. Okay, wake yourselves up, okay?
Take a break, grab a snack, come back in 5.
Okay, I'm not some of those.
Now it's time to thread your machine.
First, let's load the bobbin. Open the door to your bobbin chamber and either load the bobbin into the bobbin case if it's front loading or drop it in if it's top loading. In both cases, drop your bobbin so that the thread will unwind counterclockwise. On the side of your bobbin case or inside the metal case on top loading machines, there's a little metal hook right here. Pull your thread and catch it against the hook. Then put it back the other direction, sliding the threads into the metal groove along the side of the case. Make sure the thread stays hooked on this metal hook. For front-loading bobbins, pull the tab on the bobbin case and set the bobbin case back into the bobbin chamber. If it's top-loading, replace the bobbin cover plate. Leave the extra thread hanging out of it. We'll come back to that in a minute.
Place your spool of thread on the spool pin on top of your sewing machine. Make sure to place the thread so it will unwind counterclockwise. Most machines will have a step-by-step threading guide printed right on your machine. You'll see it as we go through each step. First, pull the thread across the top of the machine and hook it through the thread guide, which is this little piece sticking out right here. Pull the thread toward you and then guide the thread down through the groove in the front of the machine and loop it on the bottom of the groove. Now bring it back up and thread it through the take-up lever at the top. If your take-up lever isn't visible up at the top, twist the hand crank toward you until it moves up. Hook it through here and make sure the thread goes all the way down to the front of the take-up lever and rests in the little hole at the front. Pull the thread back down through the groove on the front of the machine toward the needle and then thread it through the needle. Some machines also have a little hook directly above the needle that helps your thread stay in place, so you can loop it through there before threading your needle. Once it's threaded, pull the thread out a few inches and then slide it through the little slit in the presser foot and pull it out the back of the machine like this. Lastly, we need to bring the bobbin thread up since right now the thread is coming out of the bobbin chamber where we left it. Hold the top thread with one hand and twist the balance wheel slowly toward you with the other hand. The needle will grab the bobbin thread and pull it up through this hole in the bobbin plate. Use a pair of tweezers or a pin to grab the thread and pull it all the way out. Now pull both threads back behind your presser foot and out the back of the machine.
Now your machine is threaded and you're ready to sew.